phone calls, no messages. Nothing but junk mail and overdue bills to keep me company. Seems nobody wants to hire a real private dick anymore, a professional like me. A guy who does the detective work nobody else wants to do. A guy who wears hats and walks around in a black and white world. I began contemplating a more profitable line of work, like politics.
We are the show you want to know. It's time to talk to you.
All right, folks, good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here on AM 830 WCRN. I'm Joe Mangiacotti, and for the next hour, you can join me here on AM 830 WCRN Radio Central by dialing 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. And that will get you into the studio for two-way talk and conversation today behind the board. Behind the glass, flying the board. I think he's back from vacation. Welcome back, Ted. I hope you had a fantastic time. Don't forget, folks, we do stream 24/7 to the TuneIn app. So that means you can take us anywhere. That's a fantastic feature. I love that feature. You can put it on your device, whether it's your tablet, your phone, what have you, or even your laptop. I think that's great. And, of course, you can tell Alexa to play WCR, and she'll do that. No questions asked. She just does it, and that's fantastic. Don't forget that this show is turned into a podcast when I get off the air. So subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, like iHeartRadio or Spotify, Podbean. Go to any of those places and just subscribe to the Joe Mangi Show, and you'll be notified when a new edition drops. And I do air a live show here on AM 830 WCRN on Wednesdays and Thursdays, 11 to noon. Don't forget, we're streaming. I always stream from the Cameo studio, so the Cameo cam is on. If you want to peek into the studio, you can do that on my the station's Facebook page, as well as my social media at Joe Mangi Show. So that would be Facebook and X and YouTube and Rumble and the LinkedIn profile. And yes, we are now streaming on Instagram, which is kind of cool. So I think that takes care of housekeeping, folks. 508-871-7000. We've got a lot of things to talk about. Always what to pick out is always the issue for 1 hour at a time. One of the biggest stories internationally anyway would be with the direct U.S. economic angle here in Iran. President Trump says that the United States of America, has total control over the Strait of Hormuz, while Iran is rejecting that claim. But they also don't even admit to the fact that they're even talking to us, right? At the same time, there are these reports that the U.S. and Iran may be moving towards some kind of an arrangement deal, even if attacks involving commercial shipping continue to happen. So are we closer to peace with Iran, or are we watching two sides talk while the situation around the strait continues to escalate? Gas prices, oil shipping, inflation, military involvement, Trump's foreign policy. This is all one big story there. Also, if you didn't catch it, right, there was this change. Trump changes the federal approach to the childhood vaccines. The administration issued a new executive order. Now, Trump does these EOs, and he assumed everybody just follows it. No questions. It just ripples through. And Elon Musk pointed out that wasn't happening. That was part of the whole Doge thing, by the way, is not only Trump writing these executive orders, but then trying to ensure that they actually were being followed. Because, again, and I know if you listen to the show here, you know this is a pet peeve of mine, is that we have these agencies and administrations in our government that aren't elected, and they have no oversight, and they don't really answer to anybody, but their rules and regulations have the effect of law. And a lot of these people, including people in the State Department, which is the crazy one, feel like I've been here for 20, 30 years in a career. Presidents come and go. We don't. So we're going to do what we're going to do and what we like. So anyway, this executive order, so let's see how that all shakes out here. It has created some significant I guess, fight already, right? With medical organizations, public health officials pushing back on that. So who should decide what goes on with the childhood vaccination schedule? Washington, doctors, parents, combination of the three. So this is a pretty good Trump versus medical establishment parent choice conversation we can have there. If you watched yesterday, for those that watch politics, it was maybe not the Super Bowl, but your playoff, right? Because we're seeing the Wisconsin governor's race. Very interesting one here. Because it's not just Democrat versus Republican anymore. Milwaukee County Executive Dave Crowley narrowly defeated that progressive, in other words, DSA, Democratic Socialists, Francesca Hong yesterday. I mean, really, like 3,000 votes, 39.8 to 39.4. That's a close race. And don't forget that El Said, that the polls told us we're going to, win with these massive margins, right? It's like a point. It was a very, very close race there as well. So is Wisconsin another example of Democrats trying to figure out what kind of party they want to be heading into the midterms? All right. And also, we'll talk a little bit about Mamdani's this pied-à-terre tax. More on that. We'll get into that a little bit. But there's a lot of things here to talk about. I think the main event for today's show has got to be right here in Massachusetts, folks, right? Because we saw this crazy bill become law as Maura Healey and jackals around here were applauding. And it's this new abortion. And I don't do the abortion discussion on the show, if you haven't noticed, a lot. Like, it's just the Joe Mangiacotti show. You're not going to find a lot of abortion discussion happening here. But at this point, I think we have to talk about it because it is Massachusetts. Our little Commonwealth is in national news, and they're hammering away at us. And there are political arguments that divide us. There are religious arguments that divide us. And then there are moral questions so profound that they force us to stop arguing about Democrat and Republicans, conservatives and liberals, and ask a much more basic question. What do we believe a human life is worth? And today, Massachusetts, or yesterday, has given us exactly that question. Governor Healey signed legislation, and it removed the Commonwealth's previous statutory restrictions on abortion after 24 weeks of pregnancy. The law now places greater emphasis on the professional judgment of the physician rather than the previous 4 categories written into the state law. I think ambiguity in a law is dangerous, which is why often when there's a little gray area, and especially, if you say you're in a contract suit, you go to court, you're suing another company or they're suing you, the court always says, or the court tends to say, if this is vague and not really clear, we are going to rule against the person who wrote the contract because they were trying to probably pull something. That's typically what happens. And to say, not outline it, right? Because they always, remember, it was always, yes, abortions are rare in extreme circumstances, but that's it. First of all, they're not rare in extreme circumstances anymore. But what are those circumstances? What are these ones you're talking about? You just open-ended and vague. And this is what this is doing. It doesn't give an outline. It's leaving it to the doctor and you to decide. So supporters say this is about compassion. And they say pregnancy can become medically complicated. Yeah. Women have been given birth since the dawn of time, of course. It's our species still here on the planet. And babies and or mothers, or even both, dying in childbirth was unfortunately a very common thing up until a century ago or so, and not even. Now, they say pregnancy can become medically complicated. No kidding. And that's why there's so much put into prenatal care and vitamins and checkups and ultrasounds, because it can be. And they say fetal diagnoses can be devastating. They say doctors need flexibility. They say patients should not have to leave Massachusetts to receive care. And it always interested me how aborting a baby, they use the word care, or the process is always just women's health. Let's put a pin in that for a moment. And those arguments are serious, right? They're serious arguments. But there are serious arguments on the other side too. What if the unborn child is already a human being? Yes, I know. That's going to present other questions, right? What if human life begins at fertilization? If that's true, does viability determine whether that human being deserves protection? And if viable, where's the line? Is that the line, and why? Is it because the baby can breathe independently? Because the baby has developed a particular part of the brain? Is it because the baby can feel pain? Because the baby could survive outside the womb with modern medical technology. So which becauses are we talking about? And if medical technology changes that line, does our definition of human worth change with it? They're not easy questions. And I don't think either side does itself a favor by pretending that these are, that they're easy questions and that they're absolute. Those who oppose abortion need to acknowledge the real life medical tragedies that pregnant women and families can face. The reality. And those who support abortion rights need to acknowledge the moral question that has troubled humanity for centuries. At what point does the developing human life inside the mother become someone whom society has a responsibility to protect? The Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs changed the legal landscape. The court said the Constitution does not establish a federal constitutional right to abortion and returned the issue to the political branches and back to the states. Massachusetts has now made its choice. But a law can answer the question of what is legal without answering the question of what is moral. And that is where today's conversation is going to begin. Because here's the question I want us to wrestle with today. Are there moral limits to what a civilized society should permit, even when law says something is legal? And we draw lines all the time. We say there are things government cannot do to a person. We say there are things one human being cannot do to another. We protect children because they're vulnerable. We protect people who cannot protect themselves. So where does the unborn child fit into the moral framework? And on the other side, where does the pregnant woman fit into this? Does protecting one person's life require the government to control another person's body? Can both interests be morally real at the same time? And perhaps the hardest question of all, if there is a line that separates a pregnancy from a human life deserving full protection, where exactly is that line? And what is the principle that puts it there? So today, we're not going to settle this question with a slogan, guys. We're going to put the strongest arguments on both sides on the table. When does life begin? What does viability really mean? Does fetal development change the moral equation? What happens when a pregnancy threatens the mother? That's always a big argument, right? Does a mother have to carry a pregnancy to term if it endangers her life? Is that a question of whose life outweighs or is worth more than the other? What happens when that fetus has a devastating diagnosis? We can tell now with technology. We know this. Should the government make those decisions, or should the doctor do it? Or should the mother do it? And if the answer is that the decision belongs to the woman and her physician, are there circumstances in which even that principle must have a limit to it? This is not merely a debate about Massachusetts law. This is a debate about the meaning of human life, individual liberty, medical ethics, government power, and the responsibilities of a civilized society. So let's have the uncomfortable conversation. We don't do it on this show often. We have uncomfortable conversations, just not ones about abortion often. And we have to challenge both sides of this argument. Let's reject the easy slogans here. And let's see whether somewhere beneath all the politics we can identify the principle that tells us where that line should be. And then there's, of course, always the argument in the abortion discussion about the father. We're talking obviously about the biological father here. Because it takes two to tango. And the moment that child is born, married or not, we hold that father responsible, don't we? Child support. And then depending on what the circumstances are, if it's a married couple or a couple living together as a family, decisions are clearly shared. They're rearing that child together. But if it's a baby mama situation, then you've got the law recognizes and society is recognizing that the father has certain responsibilities for the life of that child. And if they aren't living as a family, for whatever the reasons, then they're child support. And if it's joint, but there's two types of custody, right? You've got custodial custody and you've got custody of the parent. So one says the child will live primarily with this parent, and the other form of the custody is who gets to decide. Is it equal? What school they're going to go to, whether they can play football, they're going to take piano lessons, that kind of stuff. But as soon as the baby's born, the sperm donor in this situation, the biological father, has certain rights and responsibilities. But do they not have any up until the point of birth? It's been clear that the father doesn't have a say other than that input the mother gives them or permits them to have. And we are using terms mother and father. We're not using birth in person or uterus carrier or uterus challenged or anything. Mother and father, traditional meanings and sense. And not just for the purpose of conversation. It's because that's what they are. And I don't accept constantly being the dictionary being changed. I mean, telling me that words mean different things than they have meant. And I think we all should stop that and refuse to keep having that happen to us. But let's put a pin in that. So there's always that question, right? Because the father doesn't get to have any input as to whether the child is aborted, much less when they're aborted. But they absolutely have to be there morally, ethically, and of course legally when the child is born. So what say you? 508-871-7000. Let's talk about some of the arguments on both sides of this. And before I do that, though, maybe we should look at the Supreme Court in their decisions. See, Massachusetts is now legislating in the world created by Dobbs' decision. And of course, we go back to the Roe v. Wade in 1973. Roe established that decision, and it wasn't a constitutional protection of this until 1973. And the court in Roe versus Wade established a constitutional protection for abortion under the 14th Amendment and created the trimester framework. And then Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 92, right? Casey abandoned Roe's trimester framework, but maintained constitutional protection for abortion before viability and adopted the undue burden test for abortion regulations. And when the court uses terminology like this, guys, right, before viability, what's viability? And viability changes. I have a friend that has a beautiful, healthy little girl who's probably 7 now, 8, but was premature by a long time. Because I remember going up to UMass in the ICU NIC unit there, where she was in this incubator type of thing, hoping that she clings on to life. So viability changes as technology, or depending on the technology available, right, and the techniques in medical care given. Then the court had another issue in 2007, Gonzalez versus Garhart, right? The court upheld federal prohibition on a particular late-term abortion procedure. Importantly for this discussion, the court recognized legitimate governmental interest in parental life, maternal health, medical ethics, and fetal pain. So now fetal pain comes into this debate in 2007. And then there's another court hearing and decision in 2016. Whole Women's Health versus Hillerstedt. And the court struck down Texas requirements for abortion providers after finding that the burdens imposed were not justified by sufficient health benefits. So now the court is looking at the providers. And then just a few years later, 4 years later, in 2020, June Medical Services versus Russo. Another decision here. The court again dealt with admitting privileges requirements for abortion providers and applied the abortion rights framework that existed under that Casey ruling. And of course, it brings us to 2022. Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. And this was the game changer. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was telling us all along this was going to happen, because she never thought the court had the power, the right, the role in Roe versus Wade. So the Supreme Court held, and I'm talking about the Dobbs decision here, the court held that the Constitution does not confer a constitutional right to abortion and expressly overruled Roe and Casey. So the court returned authority to regulate abortion to elected representatives. And that's the crucial point, guys. Dobbs did not, despite the craziness in the streets and the signs and everything we saw, and let me be very clear, and I'll speak slow for the kids in the back row, Dobbs did not make abortion illegal. It changed who gets to decide the rules. And just one more time, Dobbs did not make abortion illegal. States now have substantially greater authority to establish their own abortion laws. Massachusetts has chosen to move in the opposite direction from states imposing restrictions. And the new law removes the former statutory restrictions after 24 weeks and places greater reliance on physician's judgment. Doesn't get down into the weeds. It doesn't drill down on this. It doesn't use medically used verbiage. It just says physician's judgment. Okay. I'd make where is the line the question for today. Right? Where is that line? And what is the principle that gets you to that conclusion? Right? What is that thought process? What is what are the elements that get you to where the line is in your mind? Because we have these extremes, don't we? Sounds like under Massachusetts law, the day before your due date, you can have a discussion with your doctor, and if you can find a doctor willing to do this, abort that child. I mean, we had that. I'm drawing a blank, but I know somebody can text. Our text line is running 617-297-8388. The governor, the one that was the doctor who was, I think, Virginia, wasn't he talking about you can actually give birth to the child and make it warm and comfortable, and then have a discussion with the mother about whether you're going to keep it. But folks, we have to take our break here, mid-show break on the Wednesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. Lines open and available at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. Our text line is running at 617-297-8388. 617-297-8388. We'll be back on the other side. Stick with us.
WCRN. Time now for the forecast from the Boston Independence Group Weather Center. Call Jerry Doherty today at 877-772-1776. Retirement is within reach.
I'm Chief Meteorologist Sherry Spearn. Here's the latest Boston 25 weather on Radio 830 WCRN. We do have partly sunny skies for the afternoon today. Expect high temperatures in the low and the mid 80s, and it's actually going to feel less humid than the past couple of days. You'll see increasing smokiness in the skies late in the afternoon. Overnight tonight and tomorrow, we do have some widely scattered showers expected. It's not a washout tomorrow, but you're going to want to have an umbrella with you during the day. High temperatures tomorrow, also in the low and the mid 80s, but you will notice some increasing humidity levels. I'm Chief Meteorologist Sherry Spearn. You can hear Boston 25 live for the morning drive weekdays on AM 830 WCRN.
More live and local radio is next. Stay tuned to Radio Central 830 WCRN.
Join us at the corner of fresh and familiar. North Star Music. New England hits that made radio great. Evenings at 8 on Radio Central WCRN.
Polar Park is the place to play. It's still the best ballpark in AAA. Unibank fireworks every Friday. Sunset catches every Saturday. And kids run the bases every Sunday. Visit WooSox.com or call 508-500-8888 and get your tickets today. Polar Park is the place to play. It's still the best ballpark in AAA.
WCRN, where the left and the right meet in the middle. Whether you lean left, lean right, or just want to stay informed, WCRN has you covered with diverse voices, lively debates, and thought-provoking discussions. You'll hear it all right here. Radio Central.
All right, folks, welcome back here to the second half of the Wednesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN Radio Central. And don't forget, lines are open and available. 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. That's 508-871-7000. And our text line is also running at 617-297-8388. 617-297-8388. You can text that like you would anybody else, and it appears on the screen here in the studio in real time. And don't forget, other than Alexa or TuneIn app, or of course tuning into AM 830, you can also watch and listen on the station's Facebook page and my social media, Joe Mangi Show. 508-871-7000. I did something I don't often do on this show, and that is table the discussion of abortion. Not a topic I typically ever cover. But this new Massachusetts law, and I don't know if you saw the signing where Maura Haley is surrounded by all these females and they all have the pink on. And they applauded to this bill. Did you applaud with her, or were you disgusted by that scene? What say you? 508-871-7000. Let's go to Ken. Hey, Ken. Morning. Been a little while. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Joe. Yes, it is a issue with multifaceted way of viewing what's happening. You know, you start broadly of, are we better off with Dobbs than Roe for the nation? Absolutely. But it also opened the door for going in opposite directions by state, as the action of Massachusetts indicates, effectively providing fewer protections. And here's three words I never hear on the right: fetal life protections. Do you think if they used those three words over and over and over again, in the manner that our opposition uses their words, that we'd be more effective?
Fetal? Say that again.
Fetal life protections.
Okay.
I know we hit the pro-life and the religious aspects of it. We now live in a culture where there are areas where there's hostility, very clear hostility to anything that's religious in a traditional sense. And Massachusetts can be included in that. And so within the context of where we are, you ask yourself, well, can something occur to push in the opposite direction of what was just signed? And it's very unlikely, simply because the Republicans have such a small representation in the state, not only in the number that are registered, but in the number that are elected. And there's not a good reason to believe that in the House and the State House, State Senate, that's going to change in a way that is in any way competitive for Republicans. Therefore, we really are nationally diverging. In other words, we're more segregated than ever, you could say, where, okay, you really hate what the Mass legislature and the governor just did, go find another state.
Well, yes, that was part of the argument on it, but instead of having to find another state, I mean, wouldn't you think, Ken, that all the states would come roughly, or should come roughly within relatively the same benchmarks here? And that speaks, I think, to the representation, right? We got like 40% here in Massachusetts who are Republican or conservative, and look at the numbers that Trump did. but we don't have one representative from Massachusetts, and we have only one Republican in all of New England. We even have an independent, right? And then Bernie Sanders isn't even a Democrat. I know it seems like he's the face of the Democratic Party, but he's not even a registered Democrat. So this keeps opening other conversations. Well, why is that? Well, there's gerrymandering, of course, right?
But that's not the answer, Joe. To New England, I can't imagine a way of gerrymandering to get even 3 seats for that a Republican out of nearly 30.
Well, see, I don't think we should gerrymander to get the seats. Okay, I'd say, and we're going to take a diversion here for a second. I think that because we have the technology, and meaning that we have the algorithms, the computer, the AI, and everything, that we should just put the people who are actually where they live, not even registered to vote, just where people live, because we're supposed to elect based on representation of American citizens and where we live. So we put the population through the census, who lives in this house, how many people, and then we tell AI, or we write a program where the algorithm says draw district lines. And, there are 160 state legislators in Massachusetts, 40 in the House, and 40 senators. And I forget what that represents. Let's say it's 160,000 people per state rep. Just tell the AI, draw the district lines based on population, and don't even give it registered either voting history or registered party affiliation, nothing. And I think that's how we should come up with it, because that would be the true elected representation, because it's not even taking that in. We have no idea how people are going to vote. We're just basing it on the population, 160,000 people in that district, 160,000 in the next, etc. But we got off that topic. This Massachusetts law, where does this law sit with you on, and I don't know what are we going to call it, acceptance level, discuss level, okay with it, not okay with it? What's your thought? I know you're New Hampshire, but we're talking about the Massachusetts, specifically this little show Maura Haley put on with the signing of it.
It's disgusting. But
and the vagueness bothers me, Ken. The vagueness, right?
Oh no, it's the being so open to killing a third trimester fetus that is capable of living. Because in any case, by and large, that they provide but it's like, okay, maybe you have a stillborn baby. Let it be stillborn. You don't ghoulishly chop it up or in some way poison it, which is the means to which to kill it. Suck its brains out.
Although, wait a minute, if it's stillborn, it does present certain health issues to have a dead human in you. I mean, there's medical justification to removing that at that point. It's
right. Which isn't abortion.
No,
if it actually is.
That's a medical procedure.
Right. Period. But they're using the excuse that, well, you just don't know. It could be awful decision for, it's awful regardless of how a fetus or life that's capable of living on its own ends. That is always awful. But you have to have standards. And this is just basically saying, do whatever the doctor wants. And then that just opens the door to all sorts of corruption on the medical front.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what you've got. And that's one of the negative parts of Dobbs. But in balance, are we better off about Dobbs than Roe? Absolutely. Because there's far more states that will take protective action.
Yeah. And I find it interesting, and I mentioned it briefly in my monologue or opening, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right, who the left and women's powers often embrace and point to, actually warned us for many years that R.V. Wade was going to be back on the table because she thought it overstepped in making it this constitutional protection that isn't in the Constitution, and that the court overstepped its bounds. And she said for many years, it should be back at the state level. But here's the issue. When it goes to the state level, we've got this, right? So Massachusetts has, I think, this ridiculous, this is all I'm going to say on my position. It's absolutely ridiculous that that you can abort a living human being. I mean, the difference is a couple inches of skin, fat, and muscle. That this is a human being right now, and if you don't intervene and kill this person, and it's born, then now it has all the protection of a human life. And at the same time, these people who want to say you can abort at any time, that it's not a baby, it's not human, it's a fetus, are okay, that if you kill a pregnant woman, it's 2 homicides, isn't it? They charge you for 2. So on one hand, the law recognizes that you murdered 2 people, but it doesn't protect the second person with the same zeal that you would protect the mother.
We have that in New Hampshire, Joe.
Do you? New Hampshire.
Of 2 deaths because one was a fetus.
In New Hampshire, what's the abortion law in New Hampshire?
Significant restrictions on the 3rd trimester. So that was done, about a year or so prior to I returning to New Hampshire. And Chris Newman supported it and signed it. So it's sort of a pretty much old way, Roe v. Wade, where you are abortions are allowed first 2 trimesters and very restricted in the 3rd.
Got it. Okay. Final thought.
Someone in the state that is fetal life protection minded should sue all the way to SCOTUS if you want to see it change. That's your only opportunity.
Yeah. Or we could do it by legislature, by changing out the governor, maybe getting
that's not happening.
Yeah, but wouldn't that be sweet if it did?
The State House and State Senate are so wildly left. It's going to take way beyond our passing for that to change.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Ken, thank you for the call. Always appreciate it. All right, man. 508-871-7000 to join the conversation, folks. Lines open and available. That's 508-871-7000. Of course, our text line is also up and running at 617-297-8388. Arguments to and from, we've run through these. Strong arguments for permitting abortion, right? Bodily autonomy, right? That's the central argument, right? Pregnancy profoundly affects a person's body, health, and life, and the government should not force someone to remain pregnant against her will. Yeah, her will. Funny that I noticed during the lockdowns and the pandemic that a lot of people who were extremists about abortion rights also, at the same time, had no problem telling you that you had to inject an experimental drug into your body. And if you didn't, you were a killer. You were an awful human being. You should be put into a camp, et cetera, et cetera. So, of course, the pro-abortion arguments of pregnancy can threaten the mother's life or health, right? Complications can develop rapidly. Supporters argue that doctors, not legislators, are better positioned to determine when ending a pregnancy is medically appropriate, which brings my thought to this new Massachusetts law. When you get into that 3rd trimester, what is going to happen? I'm not saying there isn't sometimes some extreme perfect storm of stuff that comes together. But way before that point, we have the ability to determine that baby's gender or sex, I should say. Is it a male or female baby? Do they have any birth defects? We know this before the child's born. And if your child has an extra chromosome, is that justified in aborting them? Because they would be born with an extra chromosome? What if they were born with cerebral palsy or something else? Should aborting a fetus be a treatment to a birth defect? And of course, the mental health matters, right? That's also pro-abortion. Supporters argue that pregnancy-related psychological suffering should not automatically be dismissed simply because there isn't any immediately measurable physical threat. You know, there are steps to even stop a pregnancy. We also have RU486, right, the day after. Because I'm much more comfortable with ending a pregnancy or stopping a pregnancy when we're talking about a few cells have just initially started to form. I think that's a big difference to a viable human being in the third trimester. And then they also argue severe fetal abnormalities, as I was saying. So some pregnancies involve diagnosis that mean the fetus will either die shortly, before or after the birth. So the supporters argue parents should be allowed to decide whether to continue with the pregnancy. I know a couple that had that, and they faced that. And it was probably one of the saddest things I ever saw is they went to term, had the baby, and it died, I think 7 days, or 6 or 7 days after its birth. And going to a funeral where the casket is just this tiny, it's a horrible thing. But a diagnosis isn't always predictable, right? Medicine doesn't operate with perfect certainty. Supporters argue that, rigid statutory categories can force doctors to wait until patients' conditions become sufficiently severe before they act upon it. And pregnancies, right, does not always follow a predictable timetable. So these are arguments for abortion, right? A person may discover a serious fetal maternal problem late in the pregnancy. And I think that's just much more rare today, isn't it? Because look at what we can do today. But supporters argue that the law shouldn't punish someone for a medical reality she couldn't control. And then the one with the pro-abortion is that, the doctors need discretion. Boy, does that depend on that doctor's moral compass? It depends on that doctor's views, maybe their religion, right? Their science, half of them, versus any religious side that they might have been brought up with. And what if they're like that governor? What is his name? I don't have time to Google it here on air. Somebody will text it or let me know. Who literally say we do the birth, we deliver the baby, we keep the baby warm and comfortable, and the doctor has a discussion with the mother, and if she wants to abort it, they'll kill the baby that's a live human being in the cradle next to them. That is just beyond my comprehension for that one. So when they say doctors need discretion, that leaves way too much up to who the doctor is and what their beliefs are, opposed to the society's moral compass on this. Patients shouldn't have to leave Massachusetts for care, right? Supporters say, hey, existing restrictions cause some patients to travel out of state for later pregnancy care. So this law, they get to stay in Massachusetts. That's a whole nother segment or show to talk about that, about states that have all these different levels. And I think it should go to the state But we do have states that have very strict abortion laws, and then we have now Massachusetts as an example. And of course, pro-abortion is going to argue, hey, the government shouldn't impose one moral or religious belief over the others. People disagree profoundly about when personhood begins, right? Supporters argue that the state shouldn't force everyone to live according to one religious or philosophical conception of a fetal personhood. Can't that be answered with science? Inviolability isn't a fixed moral boundary. This is what pro-abortion says. A pro-choice advocate, right, will argue that viability is a medical estimate, not a constitutional or moral definition of personhood. But can't we medically agree when that fetus is a person? It seems strange to me that that would be such a big mystery. And of course, they also argue for pro-abortion, right? The woman's circumstances matter. And this is usually when I start to get in trouble because I have all sisters. And not being a person who could ever be pregnant or carry a child to term. We talk about this, right? The circumstances. Supporters point to rape, abuse, poverty, coercion, family, circumstances, right? Other realities that may make continuing a pregnancy profoundly consequential. But shouldn't the question there be, if you were raped, if a woman's raped, and this is one of the most horrific things I can imagine a woman could go through. But there's immediate, or should be immediate, medical attention there. First of all, the rape kit that gets performed to determine exactly what has happened and whether things are detected, without getting in too graphic on this. But often at that time, the ER or the doctor's office or whatever should be offering options to prevent it from taking, meaning a pregnancy from developing there, or to end one at that level. No, right? And then what about abuse? That's another discussion. And not all women are strong enough to get out of that situation. And we have, as a society, and I have dealt with this through my agency many times, and I've taken women physically out of situations and brought them to safe homes. Even this Secretary of State's office here in Massachusetts, there's a program that if you're the victim of abuse, male or female, it doesn't matter, your mailing address becomes one in which the state provides, so no one can actually know where your physical dwelling is, where you are physically living. So all mail, again, is provided, or an address, mailing address provided by the state for that circumstances. But that's a much bigger discussion about the abuse part of it. And again, the poverty circumstances, that tends to be a big factor when couples decide whether to have a child, right? And birth rates have drastically dropped. First of all, we don't have young people aren't getting married, right? Our marriage rates are plummeted. Young men don't understand why get married. If all they're interested is sexual gratification, that's not difficult to have. They don't tend to not be interested in marrying. Again, get in trouble here, but we know the reasons why marriage is down. Therefore, birth rates are also down. But poverty, you probably shouldn't have a child if you don't think that. But many people have had babies, unexpected, early in life, starting out, they don't have anything, right? all of our parents, don't all of our parents, or maybe it's you have that story. That maybe when you first got married or your partner first got pregnant, you guys were living in a studio apartment or some really crappy one-bedroom apartment because you were at the beginning of your life when you were building that career. And then coercion. That, to me, that falls under the abuse. Family circumstances. And then the other realities. But see, I think all of those things that they talk about when they bring this up is got to be connected to, those are things that you know early on. I don't understand how you get to the third trimester when any of those things that the pro-abortionists are talking about becomes an issue. And of course, the final thing, right? They say the ultimate decision should belong to the patient and the physician. Should it though? Should there not be any statute guidelines? Should we not, as a society, have some universal understanding as to what's acceptable here? So this is essentially what the Massachusetts legislature philosophical position is, right? Decisions about abortion care should remain between the patient and the medical provider rather than being dictated by a statutory checklist. But we have statutory checklists in so many other areas in our lives. Now, I had another dozen points and issues against the abortion. I don't have the time to go through them like I did with the ones for the pro. But it's the ones we know, right? Human life begins at fertilization. The unborn child is a distinct human organism. The question of personhood, viability isn't a measure of humanity. Viability changes with technology, in geography for that matter. Developmental milestones don't necessarily create human worth. Late abortion raises a different moral question. Fetuses can survive outside the womb at increasingly earlier stages. These are all arguments on the other side of it. But we are out of time for our Wednesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here on AM 830 WCRN. Don't forget, the show is turned into a podcast and will be available shortly on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, etc. So subscribe wherever you get them. And, of course, follow me on my social media platforms at Joe Mangi Show. That's M-A-N-G-I, Joe Mangi Show, on all my social media platforms. Back tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. for the Thursday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show. But that will wrap up today's show, folks. So have a fantastic rest of your day.